welcome to the Pitch of Discontent. Owen back again for another guest episode. Very, very pleased to be joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Jimmy Kyle. Hello, sir. How you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. How are you?
I'm,
Ninda, how are you?
I'm doing good, man. Thank you so much. I'm doing pretty good. I think I'm kind of excited to get into this chat. You're someone that I've followed for a number of years, and I've watched your music and artistic career kind of go from strength to strength and grow and evolve. And I'm really, really pumped to talk about this new record. So we're just going to jump straight into that. Jimmy, for people who might not be familiar with you, could you give us a brief introduction about kind of who you are, what your deal is, and kind of what we're talking about?
I guess who
are you, Jimmy?
So I'm a proud Thungutti man. I come from the mid-north coast of New South Wales. I have been involved in the music industry in some capacity since I was a kid, and been in a few different bands, and then I guess set out on a solo project. And that solo project is kind of like 4 records in, 3 or 4 albums, depending on how you want to look at it. And I came from sort of, I guess, a heavier music background, punk, metal, hardcore. And when I went solo, I borrowed a guitar and wrote sort of a very different type of record. And my career had featured some hardcore guys in it. I guess like the first record had Tyrone Ross from Morning Tide.
That's right, yeah.
The second record, Andrew from Comeback Kid produced, but they were never hardcore records. They were adjacent to all of that. But I guess that's some sort of frame up. And then in the more recent releases, there's a clear band shape, and it's sort of, there's been this big evolution in between, and that's, I think, like the quick version.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I think you've given us an excellent kind of one-shot kind of entry point into the Chasing Ghosts kind of lineage story, however you want to look at it.
Yeah,
I guess
there's a lot around all that.
For sure. And I mean, look, that's the great thing about the podcast, the long form chat. We can kind of get into all the bits and pieces of that. To pick up on a point that you mentioned there, you're kind of a figure that's in this tradition of the guy from the heavier alternative space picking up the acoustic guitar and doing something a little bit more soulful, something a little bit more folky, and kind of part of a different kind of tradition, but one that runs parallel to both.
Yeah, so the punk troubadour.
That's right, the troubadour. Hell yeah.
That's kind of. But I think I wrote it was kind of like an alt country record, is folk and pop sensibilities. It wasn't really, I didn't really know what I was going to write. It just is what came out and what I had access to, and the vision was to be able to. I sort of had a chip on my shoulder. I'd out of the hardcore scene about, whether or not I could write songs. And I was like, well, here we go. Let's go find out and put some work in and put some effort into actually crafting a song past the point of when the anxiety subsided, when you've got something. Some people stop at that point, and it was about spending time in the craft and really being critical, usefully critical, but just asking myself some questions around whether it was sort of low-hanging fruit or whether or not the line gave something to someone, or whether it was just filling space. And there was an intention for sure to try and prove something, and then out of that, it did, and I guess the opinions that I'd listened to in the past that I'd kind of wanted to show and show myself. Of course, like all things, when you do those things, they didn't matter at that point. You know, I'd proved it to myself. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, there's definitely been a love for trying to understand the craftsmanship of songwriting as an older artist rather than, you know, just writing something that felt good initially, maybe when I was doing heavier music.
Sure, sure. So I guess to kind of kick things off, were were you always kind of listening to kind of troubadour-esque music as a kid growing up? You know, is that something that was kind of in your childhood before the
No,
heavy music stuff?
I listened to a lot of Johnny Cash,
Mm,
a lot of Neil Young,
okay.
a lot of there was Dylan, obviously would have been in the mix, but like probably a lot of, you know, those are some of the pioneers of um not so much a punk troubadour, but definitely those folk and storyteller pioneers. And I
Hmm.
think they were foundational in what I first understood to be storytelling. And I think when I started to return back to like a soft, or when I first sort of started playing something softer, it was some of those early pioneers that I went back to. Johnny Cash had a record, Bitter Tears,
Mm.
and it was written about his at the time it's like 10 tracks, I think, and it's about what happened with Native Americans and the invasion and subsequent occupation.
Oh, or like the Trail of Bitter Tears?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
And then it's sort of all these stories about prominent figures of sort of, you know, different colonels and warriors that had led battles. And it was a really interesting, wow, I was like, how did this guy write these songs, which would have ruffled a lot of people's feathers in the
For
States,
sure.
60s?
It'd ruffle
And
people's feathers now. So
100, absolutely. But how did he write them in a way that that wasn't their initial response?
sure.
And how did they dive into empathy? Because when you listen to these songs, you empathize with the Native Americans unquestionably, and as a normal, sane person would. Um, but that's like trying to get you know, an audience that's benefited from dispossession to come around and be
Mm.
empathetic to the victims of said dispossession, as we can see in the world, is a challenge.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
this guy did it in a song, and it was interesting. And so I went back when it was songs like Summer to think about how do you craft a story like this? So it has to be accurate for the historical sake and out of respect for what happened. But how do you also tell it in a way? And what I realized was the way he spoke about things was he described it. He just simply described it, but he didn't tell you how to feel.
Mm.
And that's a really big juxtaposition to hardcore. Hardcore music often is driven by statements and affirmed statements.
It's
And
very
so,
declarative, very
yeah,
prescriptive. Yeah.
and it feels great because that's the energy's asking for that. But in these ones, it's the song's asking for something else, and it's asking you to paint a picture and let the person go on the journey, and they figure out how they feel about it. But you know, a normal person who's not psychotic should kind of empathize by the end,
Yeah.
and I think that's yeah, so there was learning from those older guys, but when it came to like guys like Nick 13 or
Mm.
obviously Dallas Green or Chuck Reagan's solo work or Frank Turner, they were like contemporaries. But there was when I started, there was no one really doing the whole stand up in a nightclub, an alternative nightclub, and go down the barrel. And it wasn't long till there were other like-minded people that had been around and probably of a similar vintage. Jamie Hay, who
Mm-hmm.
I adore musically, I think is like amazing. Lincoln Lefevre, who I worked with on Homelands, another person that I think's amazing, and Jen Buxton up in Newcastle.
Yep.
So these people kind of like in the modern era, Georgia Mack, when she
Mm-hmm.
was solo, before Camp Cope, that was like a whole different life. And who else? There was others, and Will Wagner, sort
Yes,
of
that's right.
coming. But there was a whole bunch of people, but it was a real different experience because it was hard to at that point people were like, oh, what, you're just gonna solo, you're gonna play solo, and I'd often have like metalcore bands either side of me or something. Just be
Yeah,
like,
all of
that's
those crazy Destroy All Lines bills where you're like, oh, I'm the acoustic guy on like a 5 band bill or something. Cool.
yeah, I fought some of that. Like I was never like, there's no way I was going to do anything that made me feel like I was background noise or setting a mood. Like, and I love
Yeah.
seeing those musicians, and I'm like, why are you in the back of this cafe when you're amazing and a thousand
Mm.
times better than me, and you're buried behind everything, but you got to make money, and I get that. That's some people's prerogative, but with those bills, I was more inclined to be like, I'm no, I'm playing the main room, and this is how it's going to happen, and I remember a few booking agents in the early days just having no reference point. And I'm like, hey, have you ever heard of like, try to give some references? And they didn't. And then after I performed, they were like, oh, it works. I get it now. And that was the same as when I toured Asia for the first time. I think there was no one at that point, and I thought, oh, well, I better go do it. Here's an opportunity. And New Zealand was similar, but Asia in particular, like, heaps of punks come out to shows and had never seen someone scream with an acoustic guitar, and probably for good reason that it
Yeah.
has been popular.
Still in my phone, still in my phone. But don't you lie to me and tell me that you're okay when you're not. Don't you hide from me and tell me that you're alone with me. Don't you lie to me and tell me that you're alone when we stand shoulder to shoulder.
I think from like a punter perspective, like not only is it incredibly vulnerable, but it's also like quite naked in a captivating sense because like you can't hide behind anything. Like you're just up there, you're just doing the thing. So like you really stands on the performance, and that's what makes performers like yourself so good is because you give 110% to that performance, even though now in the band like you've got the full band, right? But like in those early days, like you're giving it 110%. You're the only person up on stage. It all rides on you. And that tension is key, I think, to really kind of holding people in the palm of your hand and being like, shut the fuck up and pay attention.
I see you've been to one of my shows before.
I'm familiar, yes.
Yeah, those days don't happen anymore. It's a shame.
No.
Most people just like, and it always turned out to be like a friend. Like
Yeah.
every time someone was talking, 9 times out of 10, it turns out to be Daniel Sharp from Boris the Blade. That's who it usually turns out to be. And then he's like, oh, I just bought all your merchandise. And then people told me to shut up. And I'm like, how many bourbons had you had at that point? Yeah, when you play solo, like, I'm not like a brilliant guitarist by any means or a brilliant vocalist or any of those things. Like, I could pick a million people better than me, but I involuntarily feel a certain way when I sing that is like, everyone has their own expression, and mine, like everyone, is mine. I just feel like it's cathartic, but it's it's just big. It just comes out big. And um there's been a couple of times in studios people have wanted me to sing small and with a lot of breath and a lot of air, and there's moments where you do that, but it's just not what my nature led to. It's not even about a musical preference. It was just where I sort of stayed for a long time in a
Yeah.
bigger bold sound, and that probably comes back to the Cashes and the Waylon Jennings and the big baritone storytellers. And I think not being a tenor is like, I can sing some basic tenor stuff, but I'm not a proper tenor. I'm a baritone, and the likes of Eddie Vedder would be another really good example for people of the storytellery baritone and how they marry together so well. They complement each other really well.
Yeah.
But then again, you can be Panic at the Disco and be a brilliant storyteller. Like that first record of theirs, it'd have to be one of the greatest storyteller records
Incredible record.
ever.
Incredible record,
Yeah, and lyrically thrown at you, just like coming in hot the whole way. It's very clever. So I probably like that sound, but as I see, and that's I liked. I just I guess just repeating myself really, but I just like an involuntary kind of combustion comes with it. It's just like comes out of me that big. And I think a lot of people, the vulnerability part is like, it is vulnerable to play on your own, but whatever happens is all right. And over the years and being on stage enough times and connecting with people enough, flaws can be made. They're just part of the show. There's something humorous about them. If you're prepared to be in that space, there's something, it can all be digested into the show and be fine. The nervous energy, I think, is really great, especially when you channel it into what's about to happen. Worse than all of those things is performing and not feeling anything.
I would definitely agree. Yeah.
So that's for me you don't want to go through a performance, and even when you play really well and the crowd really feels it, that you don't feel it. And those things are probably where when you have disassociation sometimes on stage, and it can happen, and it's really bizarre. But that's to me a bigger concern.
Yeah, no, I think that speaks so much to what's so powerful about your music is that, we've talked about catharsis with a bunch of different guests, and it's something that comes up in all kind of different spectrums of heavy music, right? But like, I always talk about like the root of that word goes to like the sense of bloodletting. And that's where it comes from in the ancient Greek, right? It's meant to be like this very messy, big, bold, emotive thing. And sure, you can have different kinds of catharsis for different people, but I think what you've just described to me fits my mental kind of framework of what a cathartic experience is. It's big and it's brash and it's bold, and it requires a degree of authenticity. You can't really fake it. And if you're trying to fake something like that, like the crowd is going to know immediately. And more importantly, you will know on stage. Like you said, you'll have a dissociative kind of freak out at, what am I doing? This doesn't feel real.
It's that's all spot on. Like, you're very perceptive. I feel like the power of being yourself, it truly is that it gives everyone else permission to be themselves.
Yes.
And I'm at a point in life where I don't really want a relationship with anyone if it's not the true version of them. And I know not everyone can offer that up. People live behind sort of personas and masks, and I just can't stand it. I feel uncomfortable around it when people can't be themselves. And it's not my job to be the sheriff of that and say anything or do anything or treat anyone differently. But it is a breath of fresh air when a person can just be themselves. And I've found, there's that adage, you might as well be yourself because everyone else is taken. And there's like this power to, you don't want to be the next best Rolling Stones or the next best Linkin Park or the next best Parkway. There's already one of those.
Yeah, exactly.
And so at some point you can be the first best version of whatever you're doing and what that's about. I think crystallizing that and figuring out what that is probably a lot of artists' journey, because that's maybe not where we all initially start. We probably mimic our idols first, and because they inspire us, and closer we sound to them, the more we sort of feel validated, and then at some point it sort of becomes a curse that bites you, and you have to decouple yourself from it. And it, even like now, I notice like a lot of my contemporaries sing in American accents still, and I think that's not unfamiliar, but an interesting choice when so many people don't today. And I guess could be about what market you're working towards building a fan base in, or it could just be what you grew up with and what you're familiar with. But I just find, like there's an authenticity is like a superpower, and it's attractive and it attracts conversation and people, and and I've always felt like I'm just kind of like a person who's always worn my heart on my sleeve, and I think at some point I just stopped seeing that as a negative thing and embraced it.
Justice we've never known. There should have been someone to tell you. There should have been someone to say. Protected police statues while they lie to your face. Amnesia, everybody. Everything is fine. It's all okay.
I resonate so much with what you've said, because I do think it is like a journey that not everyone goes on, but one that I've seen people older than me go on. And when I was younger, I didn't quite get it. But now that I'm, on the other side of my mid-30s, I kind of get it. And I kind of understand that journey of kind of self-growth and just being comfortable in yourself and being honest with yourself about who that really is. And I think there's kind of a natural jumping off point now to kind of talk about the new record, because although I've been following Chasing Ghosts and your work for a while, I'll admit this record is hands down my favorite and is the most kind of fully realized version of what Chasing Ghosts is to me. And I'm very interested to hear your side to that, seeing as you're the man who created it. But to me, it just felt like the vision had perfectly aligned with the message and the delivery, and everything is fully realized and there. And as soon as I pressed play on the record, I was like, oh, this rips. Like, this is Jimmy doing his thing. So talk to me about Therapy. Talk to me about the new record. What was your vision for it going in, and how are you looking to further this journey of self-discovery that we've been talking about?
The sort of frame up to kind of understand it is you got to step back a little bit to move forward, which is the first record was an acoustic record with an ensemble. The second record was a larger sound, but then with grand pianos, real strings, lots of sort of analog production. The first record was done reel to reel, all on tape, and then even the mastering process in tape. And then the second record was a hybrid of digital, and so none of these records had things like any sort of vocal production past maybe a small amount of reverb, and everything else was done in an analog fashion. So there's still some vocal production, but not in the same manner as today. Homelands was a very lo-fi record. So coming out of Homelands and thinking about what Therapy was going to be, there was a few things, and one of them was, where do we go after Homelands? So the solo to the ensemble to the sonically larger sounding record, more of a band shape, and now a full formidable band now, without offering strings and a more typical punk production. And the next sort of frontier, I guess, for me was like, where sonically to make it big. And shiny, and I'd never done a shiny record.
It is the shiny record for sure.
It's a shiny record, and people, if you don't know what that means, listen to it and you'll be like, "Oh, okay, that's shiny." And I sort of held a lot of archaic rules around what real music was or how to do real music, and see, when I left the hardcore scene, things were digital by that point, but it was. I went back to making music out of the box and with your ears, not with your eyes. So today we do it with our eyes and our ears. Back then, you just did it with your ears, and you had to perform the whole song. You might get one drop-in point if you preference another part or something, but you were like, I did whole takes that for whole songs that were no breaks. They were a live performance essentially, and they were sung well from the front to the end. And to do that takes a lot of preparation. And so things now are done on speed, and learning the song after you've recorded it rather than perhaps the way it was done once upon a time.
That's right. Yeah.
So we sort of therapy was like, well, what if I didn't hold on to any of these sort of ideas? And I wrote a thing on my board which was adapt or die. And so it's like, all right, well, what if I released all these sort of artificial rules and ideas, and I lent into something with lots of bells and whistles, lots of ear candy and Easter eggs, and a really heavily produced, because that would be like the next, somewhere we've not been. And sort of had that idea in my head for a long time, but it was like building to it, and it didn't ever feel like the right time. And so that was one of the shapes in my head that were sort of framing up the sound of therapy. And then after Busted Lung and Summer from Homelands, both of those songs being quicker paced songs and just moving out of ballads and out of sort of more storytelling or alt country stuff and sort of down this line, I could see the response people were having to it, and we loved playing it. So when I wrote those songs, I knew pretty instantaneously they were they felt right.
Yeah.
They felt right. And so did Death. When I wrote Death as more of a ballad, perhaps more of a somber ballad. So then it was sort of like, okay, I kept sort of coming back to this approach that we used when it came into Homelands, and it was like, what are the three things we're doing that seem to be well received and seem to be the right things, and what are the three things that we're doing that aren't working for us? And I sort of said it to my team, like, if there's any criticisms of process or anything that you just like want to say, now's the time to put it on the table. And if everyone sort of says similar things, it's probably worth taking note of, and we remove whatever those are and get rid of them, and we move, and whatever we're doing right, we move towards that. So it's just like a really basic assessment, and there was and it helped us sort of shape something we thought we were doing better, and storytelling was a part of that. Like, we didn't want to surrender that. Everyone felt like that was a fundamental foundation of what the project had become, and then moving towards something with more energy. And then it felt very serendipitous and kind of like fortuitous moment to return back to kind of like punk rock music, and not exactly like things I'd done in the past, but not dissimilar. And and after I'd had this huge transition in my life, and obviously COVID had happened, and everyone's lives were up sort of turned in one way or another. So there was this big like wanting to get a lot of stuff out, and there was no way I was going to be able to write something small and delicate. It just wasn't coming for me, and everything felt big, and it felt like
it's a form matching function. You know what I mean? Like, give yourself the vehicle to deliver what you need to deliver.
Absolutely. And so then the next choice really was around who to pick as a producer. And so I had said, again, a lot of things I've got very good into leaning into sort of a sense of intuition, but also the talent around me and the relationships around me, and just when things are meant to work together, they work together. When they're not meant to, don't hold on to them and choke them. Just let it be. And I've sort of got into that as an older artist, where when I was younger, it wouldn't have come quick enough or fast enough, and didn't look the way I thought it was meant to look, and I, very rigid ideas and less malleable. And so now it's more about process and leading towards therapy. I put this idea, look, we toured with the Dead Love, and I've been watching what Stevie's been doing. I think we should work with Stevie Knight. And Rowan in our band is a close friend of Stevie's, and so he was immediately sold. And I think some of the other guys thought they were a bit surprised. I think they thought I would have picked someone, I don't know, maybe more I don't know, like adult contemporary producing, perhaps, like
Yes.
maybe less of a youthful sound or a high energy sound, maybe something more like an I Am Jimmy Kyle record sound.
Yeah, I know.
And
A warmer production resume, whereas I'd say Stevie is very shiny. If you're going for a
yeah,
shiny
but
record,
yeah,
that's what he
but
does.
Stevie probably dialed back the shiny on this to kind of keep Chasing Ghosts true to itself, but it was more shiny than we'd ever been. So we're like, we're loving that stuff. We were all about it. It was just like, oh, it's just so nice to hear it in a different energy, and you can still feel it. The Chasing Ghosts songs,
100%. Yeah,
they
I
all
think
have a fingerprint to them.
I'm not your enemy. Put your hands in your pockets and war. 'Cause my brother, oh brother, don't put your hands on her. My finger, I beg you, remember, your hands have made things before. And I'm asking you, ain't gonna change.
yeah, I can kind of see where you're getting at, because I think if I was to read it on paper without hearing any of the songs, I would be like, oh, I'm not sure if that's kind of the fit for what I know of Chasing Ghosts and what I know of Stevie, but hearing the marriage, it works perfectly. So,
so fortune favors the brave, and so
that's right.
it was like
Adapt or die, Jimmy.
Yeah, and it was lots of buzzwords I've got to in my old age, so I don't forget shit. So I have a thing, if it feels like, well, that's really just the weed. But anyway, I have a thing, if it feels like it scares me a little bit, then that's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like if I was really comfortable, there would be no excitement. So. And then Stevie, promised me, it'll be the funnest record you ever make, and it'll be the easiest record you ever make. And it was. I was like, we'll see. And it absolutely was. And I enjoyed the time together, and it built a bond between us, which is really special. And that's really what making music's about. It's just sharing moments of time together, and for me at least, and working the craft. And the rest I don't really have control over, nor do I try and prescribe too much to anymore. And so I'm not disappointed with anything that way. And when you're younger, you never compare yourself to the person who's got no one going to their show. You always compare yourself to the person who's got 1,000 people at their show.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of comparisons, the theft of joy. So I got off that train a long time ago, and alternatively you move into the, well, what's my craft about, and how do I become better at honoring myself? And I'm very fortunate to have a partner who's an artist as well, and so it's a conversation we regularly have, and it's one that comes back to all those home rules about just doing the art for the art's sake, and the rest you let go of. And therapy, then I think, like, musically, just coming back to kind of that, I guess, that third pillar, like Stevie obviously making a big shiny record's one thing, but then keeping that storytelling. But it was also about a question I'd asked myself back in Homelands was, if I was 80 and I was going to die, 80 is great. Like, if I could get to 80, but let's say I'm on my deathbed.
Yeah.
And sorry if anyone's 80 watching this.
Sorry, man. Sorry.
I'm impressed you're on the interwebs. Welcome.
Good job. Share, like, and subscribe. Thanks.
sorry, I'm just imagining elderly folk. That's really nasty. My point is, I guess, if I was an elderly person and I would, before I shut my eyes, was thinking, I really wish I'd wrote these songs. What ones would they be? And they would have been the ones that I had to have courage to write, that I would have been too scared to write. And that's what Homelands was, the beginning of that process of being like, well, what would you write about? And it's like, well, I would write about these things because they're important to me, but I was scared of criticism if I attempted them. And so, the preparation and the work reduces or mitigates the criticism, obviously, because you can't just stumble into delicate conversations and stomp over everything and expect people to, meet you in the absence of your own emotional awareness.
Yes.
It's not going to happen. But there had to be some sort of, it had to mean something. And just in the past, it would have either been too vulnerable or it would have been too risky, or I didn't think maybe I could honor it in the right way, or I'd never even really considered it. I'd kind of like, first record, a little bit introspective. I'm more thinking about the sound and the vibe and the persona and the whole kind of like, I think I'm writing my own stuff, but in comparison, I was still figuring out who I was as an artist. Like, you can't come onto your first record and say you're this, Frog Stomp is not the same record as the Ballroom. Like,
no, certainly not.
And you could do that with, another great band would be Queen. Their records evolved as they went through different decades. So there was definitely this idea of what would I write about, and I think I was scared to write about some of those topics for the same reason a lot of artists don't want to tackle them. And that was like, but that's the answer. Like that's the challenge for me, I guess, is to try and it's a bit interesting because now you have to consider lots of perspectives and you have to keep asking yourself whether or not you're meeting the desired goal of the song, or have you slightly deviated, or are you likely to be misinterpreted here, and what's the cost of that, or is it worth it? And there was all these sorts of things to consider. It wasn't just writing a song anymore, and that became really a delicate and sensitive process, but one that was informed by the opinions of lots of people. So I was prepared to show people and say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Well, and so it wasn't welded onto things other than kind of what the overall essence of the song was meant to say. And so songs like My Bingayi that condemn domestic violence, but aren't focused in condemning domestic violence. They're focused in asking for change and what change looks like. And it's like the next step of the conversation. And so everyone knows domestic violence is wrong. It's been illegal for a long time, but we're not seeing it change the behavior. So then the next step of the conversation is, well, what does that require? What does that look like? And how do we open up? It's not on the legal side and the moral side of it is parked for a moment, which is that in itself is a difficult thing to do. Yes. And how do you do that in a song? And, even in the film clip, there's considerations around, what genders take the screen time and why and how, and talks about it. And even words like, I changed some of the lyrics in that song right the day, like before it was to be mastered. And it was around, no, I can't because it sends the wrong message this way or that way. And so it's just very similar words that had slightly different meanings, and the connotations to them had slightly different tones that could be misconstrued in different ways. So the artistry of it became to reflect and to revise the work until it got closer and closer and closer to what I wanted it to be. And that's the same as in Amnesia. Everybody, like, you know, you call out 50% of massacres in the country are led by colonial police officers, and you start explaining to people that, then you got to kind of think about how you frame it up. And
yeah,
so there's all of these songs were, they're not like, oh, let's just write this song about getting trashed and smoking bongs with our mates. They're great songs, you know. Or all my friends,
friends will exist. They're fine. They're holding it down.
Yeah, they don't need me to be the next B grade version of what they're already doing an A grade job. Yeah. And there's a whole bunch of artists that do that, and you know, ones I enjoy, but that just wasn't the journey I was going on. And so the work came about writing challenging songs, and how could I do them justice, and what is the message I'm trying to send? And a lot of the message is like curiosity and tolerance and empathy, and just trying to pull people back from the precipice a little bit, from having hardline, rigid views on things. And that doesn't mean like to be a centrist either, because I kind of do think if you don't stand for something, you fall for anything.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's not that. It's just not lecturing people to make myself feel like somehow I'm floating above the rest of society with an ethereal ring around me. You know, it's not the case. It's just trying to see, there's stories are often more complicated. And I grew up on stories like Susan Vega, My Name is Luca, Fast Car, Tracy Chapman, you know, both stories of domestic violence done in a very similar way, which is that storytelling way. But in this, I was going down to the next path, because I'd sort of wrote that song in Confessions from a Phone Booth with a song called Unmarked Grave of a Russian Dancer, which was written about my grandparents and the violence that they were involved in. And so that sort of, I'd done that sort of narrative, and this was like, no, I'm talking to the perpetrator now, and that's an interesting way. Well, what do I want to say? What do I want to say that you'd actually listen to? And why do I want to say it? And what's, you know, and so there's just becomes a very interesting process. And then therapy itself was about, music is therapy, it's therapeutic, and it's been therapeutic for me. And but at the same time, it's some of these are the conversations from my therapy. Some like 10 feet tall, you know, like the lyrics are literally write it down and tell me everything you know about me, everything you figured out, you know. And it's the idea that this is the things that have been bothering me that I spoke about in therapy, and that I encourage other people that if you've got stuff weighing on you, is to do something about it. And go to a professional and find someone who works for you. And it mightn't work for the first couple of times, but you know, see it through and find a path. And then, you know, even songs like Flowers, they're all sort of, this body of work started to have a personality to it, and a meaning and a cause and a clearer identity. And it always happens when you watch your ideas form. They need some space at the start, but you can see the threads of them coming together. And so, yeah, that's another long-winded answer. Thank goodness it's a podcast.
No, that's perfect. This is, again, form and function.
I feel guilty for just being like, here's some more about me.
No, dude, this is exactly what it is. People don't want to hear about me. They want to hear about you. That's why they're here.
That's very kind of them.
I swear I'm fine. I'm not usually this big of a jerk, but I can't say I toss and turn at night, sleeping in the shower until the sun's in my eyes, and it doesn't get easier.
I will say I resonate with so much of what you just said there, because I do think that it requires a certain amount of courage to talk about the things that you have on this record.
Absolutely.
But also a certain amount of skill and craft to be able to thread that needle that we've been talking about, which is like intentionality, but without being condescending and without being overly prescriptive, and kind of encouraging a sense of dialogue with your music to kind of meet people where they're at, not where you want them to be or where you wish them to be.
It's exactly, well, yeah, I think you've framed it up quicker than I ever could, but yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. And I mean, I just think that there's such a breadth of material on this record that speaks to so much of that. Like, my favorite song is Eating Paper, which is one of the most like barn burner, upbeat, fast tempoed songs that you've ever done.
Yeah.
And it's incredible. But
Okay.
you can match that with something like Hurting Years, completely different vibe. But you're still very intentional with what you're saying, but you're also not beating people over the head with what you're trying to say. You're just giving yourself quite literally a voice to let these emotions out and to let this kind of sit with people for a bit. And that's what I've been doing, listening to the record, just kind of really listening intently to what you're saying and kind of trying to empathize with what you're going through and how the music makes me feel, which, you know, I hope is the desired effect.
Absolutely. I think, like, I love Eating Paper as a song. It's like, it's one of those songs that writes itself. But there's some lines in that song a bit like 10 Feet Tall. It's a little bit like a sister song to 10 Feet Tall. Like, it's just got this, it makes you want to sing and makes you want to
The chorus is insane.
You just want to get on the crew vocals with it and shout.
Yeah, so hooky. Like, and what I really appreciate, and I've talked about this to death with a bunch of different guests. So if you're a fan of the show, I'm sorry, I'm going to talk about it again. But like, sequencing in a record is so important, and being able to take the listener on a journey and craft an ebb and a flow and some emotional highs and lows, and to put a song like Eating Paper at the back end of the record to really kind of sandwich it where you have is like very very intentional rather. And I just think I always appreciate when people craft a record, you know, like a real record that has like an actual sequence and a front to back, and it's meant to be this cohesive experience, not just singles for a Spotify playlist. You know what I mean?
You're so perceptive, it's bizarre. Yeah, so that was like a big consideration. Was I Am Jimmy Kyle worked as like probably the last record I thought about in that record format. And it was like the real shift into people listening to Spotify,
For sure.
and to Apple, for example. And so, like, you know, Homelands really, as a response, was like, well, why are we doing 13 tracks when people, the bulk of listening is in, you know, a shorter amount of tracks? That's not how people are consuming music in the same way. So Homelands was the reason, after doing 2 full-length records, the debut and the sophomore, and then it was like, we would drop an EP. And usually you'd think perhaps you'd go the opposite direction.
Sure.
But that was a shift in music. And then returning back to an album was like, well, how do you write a record for both Spotify with that in mind and a record for people who like to listen to albums? Because that's what I like. I like being in a car, pretending I'm depressed about something, not particularly sure what, putting on sad music, driving around and sort of just having a little artificial mope, not a real one. Just a little, maybe I drive past the Macca's and remember.
Just a little fake one, you know, no one has to know. You can do it. It's fine.
And I drive past Macca's and I look at all the kids sitting there and be like, I used to do that. And just a little nostalgia moment, just a little 5% depresso, not full blown. And
never go full depresso. You always got to pull it back. Just a little bit.
Yeah, for your own sake. And but yeah, I like to get in that emotional state. Like my friend used to be the same. He's a songwriter. He's like, I get on the train. I just get on the train. I don't go anywhere in particular. I just go around and I listen to music.
Wow. Okay.
Things like that are really good when you're trying to write music. Like, because there's some sort of sense of nostalgia that it's an appreciation for things around you at the same time as recognizing how delicate it is and that time comes and goes. And so it makes it those moments a little bit mean something, a little bit special. So that's sort of with therapy, that was definitely a consideration. So the record, the way that we position the record and the singles, and so Eating Paper was like, well, we felt really confident about what we crafted with Stevie, and right, so we're going to give the fans something when they get the record, that they get some album singles, some album
Yeah.
and sit there. So Eating Paper was one we saved. Hurting Ears was another one we saved. Both we'd thought about releasing as singles, and we're like, no, let's leave something for people so they're like, oh man, it doesn't end here; it gets better. And that was the sort of the vibe. In particular, those two songs. Like Chamomile Tea was like
Another great song.
Yeah, as like a soft release though, as a single, like just to visualize it, just keeping people on the radar. But it had its own personality too, and it was a slight outlier. It's the only song in a major key on the record, and I seldom ever write songs ever. I think that could be the first song I've ever written in a major key.
Interesting.
And that's Josh Bergen's influence. But also in fairness, I got to say, like Jimmy Cole and Chasing Ghosts are, synonymous with each other, fair enough. But Chasing Ghosts with this record, it isn't just me. There's never ever a time I do anything that is ever just on my own. It is always, anything you see is always a team of people. And so Chris O'Neill in Chasing Ghosts is a brilliant songwriter, a brilliant singer. Like, for example, this dude plays piano in our band, or organ. And then we decided one of the guitar players left. They had their own thing going on. And we're like, okay, do we replace someone, or do we drop a guitar? Like, how do we resolve this? And so Chris learnt the guitar. I forgot he could play guitar. He's amazing. He's just amazing. And he turns up and he knows all the songs. And he's just like, oh, well, I guess
I'll do it. It's fine.
And it's just like, who are you? What? And there's like this, in bands, there's two types of musicians. There's the smart guys, and then there's the rest of us.
Yeah, every band needs one smart guy at least.
He's usually the producery dude, and he's probably could be a drummer or a guitarist. It's hard to know, but.
And then if you're all smart guys, recipe for failure, because it'll self-destruct. It'll go off the rails.
So this was like Chris is like a big part of that, and in reality, like Ben, our drummer, and Rowan, Josh, they're all brilliant musicians in their own right, and they're all contributors to the work we do. So I am the chief songwriter, but it's unfair to kind of just be like, oh yeah, I'm the one thinking of everything and doing everything. And then again, Stevie, his contribution to the record, he knew what I was going for. He could read. He sort of, it was like a hand in a glove, and it was great. So I think it's fair to say his contribution is evident as well, and that the trust that we had to follow him down that rabbit hole and produce the work. So again, even I'm not trying to be Mr. Humble forever, but I just think the guys do a brilliant job, and it's just not me.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly well said, because it does sound like this big collaborative effort where everyone is really, on their shit, firing on all cylinders, and everyone is committed to this vision, right? And like, even though that vision might be something that you had as an idea way back when, like, to bring that to life requires a village. It requires a whole group of people to all kind of make that a reality. So I can definitely relate to that.
And just a group that'll interrogate it too, because then they start asking questions that you're expected to have the answers to. Like, oh, didn't think that far ahead. And that's great, because then you're forced to start to consider all these other perspectives and thoughts. And I think just when I was younger, the early records, I felt like I really had to do everything myself to try and prove something. And even in the managerial side or behind the scenes, whatever it was, it's like there was some sort of inferiority complex that if I didn't do everything, it was going to be a burden on others, and or I wouldn't have earned my place at the table. And
it's that punk DIY or die kind of spirit, kind of riding through. You have to kind of push past it a bit.
Yeah, and now it's like it's not what my focus is on now. It's like you lean into the talent around you, and it's about getting out of your own way and about not sort of letting the process get halted too often by things that aren't as of bigger consequence. And it's a little dance, isn't it? Because the nuanced decisions that you make become the personality. You know, it's like a signature. The error becomes the flavor somehow, and it's not the perfection. It's rather the stumble or the error or the personality that comes forth. And so there's this sort of approach that's changed a bit for me, which is now it's all about trying to. The little voice in my head that says no is the one I just like, yo, chill, just
let it be, let it cook. Yeah.
And I can think of a million times where I'm like the better for it, like the start of Busted Lung with the little drums, the dum 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 dum, very straightforward but really effective, does what it's meant to do. And I remember when Rowan came to the table with like, oh, I should just do this here, you know, like, and I was like, no, in my head, and I was like, everyone was like, yeah, that's a great idea. And I was like, all right, cool, let's do it. And now it's like I couldn't imagine the song without it. But when you give up control of something, you're even more vulnerable. And so I trust my band, and I trust the producers I work with, and I trust the process now. And so that enables me to just let go of it a lot more and have a lot more fun.
Yeah, perfect. Speaking of trusting the process, I am conscious of time. So, wrapping up the main show here, you're taking the band on tour. You're playing songs from Therapy for early June, I believe it is, early to mid-June, hitting a couple of dates around the country. I'll have links in the show description for people to grab tickets and go out to shows and all that sort of business. But tell me, how pumped are you to play some of these songs live? That's what they sound like they were designed for.
Super excited. I don't want to play the old songs. I know
you got to throw in a couple of the hits.
100. Like there'll be a lot of good. There'll be the best of. There's enough songs now we can do a best of. There's enough albums rather.
Yeah.
There'll be lots of great moments, but it's like in rehearsal, it's watching us grow the capacity of each song and enjoying it. And it's just like new. It's like when you get a new car or something, you're just like really pumped to be in it. It's similar with songs.
Finding any excuse to take it for a drive, you're like, I just got to go around the corner to the shops, maybe get in the car and go do that drive. Yeah.
It's a bit like that. Like I don't think like the excitement you get. So at the moment, I'm getting used to in-ear monitors. This is my new big thing.
Okay.
And I love them. They're so good because I often blow my voice out when I can't hear myself properly.
Sure, yeah.
Doing heavier stuff, you don't want it to blow out. So pushing less is going to make your voice last longer. Anyway,
I imagine on tour that's like a very like decent consideration, like your longevity on tour.
Totally fine. Like if you're doing 1 or 2 nights, you know, you can power through and you'll be within reason. But if you're doing a few nights in, fatigue's like a real thing on a vocal. And if you're doing heavy vocals, that's one thing. If you're doing clean vocals, that's another thing. If you're mixing the two, they don't play very nicely together.
No.
And it's a real dance learning how to do it. And it's what I found is a lot of it's been I have an impulse to oversing the part. And then I find if I just pull back a bit, it falls back into the pocket. And that's like most things in life, right? And so this this rehearsals, we've just been like playing new stuff, and it's so exciting and fun. We're just pumped. So yes, we will play lots of classic chasing ghost bangers on the proviso that the crowd sings them, but it's like we are very excited that it's about therapy, and so that's where our hearts are right now. We're pumped on it. We've got material we've been working on for future stuff, but we're just, between the past material and the future stuff, we're in this real sweet spot where we're just leaning into learning these songs, and they're feeling we're just really excited. You couldn't wipe the grin off my face.
Yeah, fuck yeah. That sounds sick. I will wrap up the main show here. So,
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome, dude. For anyone watching or listening, I will have links in the show description to go check out Chasing Ghosts on tour. Go get in Jimmy's face and yell at him and put your arm around him and have a good time. Jimmy, thank you so much for coming on the show. In that order, yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this, dude. This was fun.
My pleasure. You're a G. Thanks, Owen.
Hello, Owen popping in to say, please sign up for the TPD Patreon. This is what helps us keep the lights on and keep the show going. The link is at the bottom of your screen right now, patreon.com/tpdpod. All of our patrons get exclusive access to Side B of our roundup episodes, so you get a few extra tracks, as well as our feature album discussion and the full show experience. Our patrons also get exclusive access to behind-the-scenes, off-the-cuff chit-chat from all of our guest episodes. But the patrons are the ones who make all of this happen. For as little as $5 a month, you can sign up to the TPD Patreon, and it really helps us out, really helps us keep the show going. So shout out to all of our patrons, shout out to our executive producer patrons. You're the real ones. And thank you so much for watching the show.